Hello and welcome back to Raise Gaming and more Monster Hunter Wilds beta. Naturally, in the second beta, we have the big boy himself, Arkveld, the flagship of Wilds. We've got a pretty tough advanced quest to do if we want to hunt him, a 20-minute time limit, 5 carts max, all while using, of course, the pretty low-end gear without proper skills. So this video is meant to tell you how to actually beat him with some proper detail and real advice. But I also do want to cover some interesting details that have sprung up around him just for fun. So let's just begin with some of those interesting details. First up, did you know if you kill him, you might get his gem, right? But if you hover over that, you can see the description, and it says that the gem absorbs life. Arkveld is a very mysterious monster, and one big kind of topic about him is how old is this dude? The way that he's so grey and the posture he has while he moves. So perhaps his gem or his power to absorb is how he's sustaining life and how he remains the last one of whatever species or classification this really is. Speaking of which, because it's now confirmed that he is trappable and ultimately capturable, it kind of confirms at very least that he's definitely not an elder dragon. But we aren't 100% sure about this classification beyond him being just a wyvern with chain-like wings. Now, with the introduction of Gore in Trailer 6, to everyone's surprise, we are wondering if he has anything to do with Gore. And with Gore having that whole question mark classification, maybe Arkveld's will be the same. When we look at the quest that we have, it refers to Arkveld as chained Arkveld, not just Arkveld. Like, this is a specific version of Arkveld. And so naturally the question will come up like, okay, if there's a chained version, is there an unchained version? And there's a lot of discussion, especially between me and Josh particularly, that we think this version of Arkveld we have is not going to be the final one. There's a lot of mystery around this character, and obviously a big story beat for him is that he's hunting the other apexes, and he's using those chains to absorb power. If you hover over Arkveld on the map, you get these details. That he's a wyvern with chain-like wings, and uses those to mow down prey and absorb elemental energy. So maybe the more he absorbs, the stronger he gets. And so maybe in the story, we'll get to face like a harder and harder version, or some sort of full proper version, quote unquote unchained version. Either way, they've done a great job with this monster, just theme and vibe wise. For example, he can randomly be struck by the lightning of the Sandtide and is utterly unfazed. Like he has literally no reaction as the lightning just shimmers through his body. It's pretty cool. Speaking of which, he can of course have the turf war with Ray Dow in this beta, and as you see, it shows that despite them being officially, when you look at the quest list anyway, the same star levels and difficulty level, Arkveld is very clearly the dominant monster here, especially with how the lightning doesn't affect him. One note is that for the theme that you hear, you've got his normal theme, and then you've got his mount theme. Yeah, they did that thing where they had the intense drums and such. It actually reminds me of the first time I mounted Zinogre in World, and the same kind of riff plays with drums. So musically, great job too. But let's now talk about how to make this hunt easier before you're actually even in the hunt. I would recommend you bring a heavy bowgun as a secondary weapon. It remains the meta offhand weapon, at least in this beta version, because it can fire demon ammo on the ground, even from the back of a seikret. And as you run through it, you're going to get, of course, that damage buff. This is one of the few damage buffs that's going to be very potent that we have in the beta, and with a big, strong enemy that you've got a time limit to kill, it definitely will help if you're regularly able to do that. I also recommend that you prep lure and flash pods and make use of them. For one, lure pods, like anything like we saw with Ray, can be used to draw him into boulder drops, like the ones at the entrance of the cave, the first one as you're entering the cave, and then the one a bit further like the middle area of the cave, let alone the multiple in the high up nest area. On the other hand, it's a good idea to have flash pods because while he does jump into the air and come down pretty quick, it's technically possible to flash pod him. He might leave the area and fly away, and that can be interrupted too. But also he has that unique grab attack, which if you weren't aware can be interrupted with flash pods, let alone just offensive pods. So having those equipped is a good idea. Also, check this out. The simple fact that you can trap him with a pitfall or shock trap also means you can capture him, so having trank bombs is a good idea. Unfortunately, you can't really make them in big supply in the beta. There is one spawn for the sleep herb, and there are 2 spawns for the power shrooms that you're going to need. You need 1 sleep herb and 1 parashroom to actually craft 1 trank bomb. And you're going to need 2 trank bombs minimum to actually trigger the capture. They respawn every 15 minutes though, so my advice is to go over to them and try to bait your palico into looting it. That will generate more sleep herbs, more parashrooms, and not actually consume the thing. And then you can pick it up and put it on that like 15-minute cooldown. Finally, outside of the hunt, before the hunt, I need to tell you about areas 4 and 5. That's the really high up nest area. There is a pop-up camp location up in that corner, which means you'll be able to fast travel there when Arkveld inevitably goes up there. It is a long climb up, and that ultimately costs a lot of time, so having a fast travel point already up there is a good idea. Next, let's talk about general tips and strats that are going to be useful for this monster. Firstly, sneak attacks are always amazing. Depending on your weapon, you might get like a nice benefit, right? But it's that stagger after the hit that allows you to move forward, do another combo, and then prep for something like a perfect evade or block or counter on the obviously incoming roar. Be aware that because he can have turf wars with things like Railgun and doshaguma, that means you can interrupt the turf war with a sneak attack. In fact, in this footage you should be looking at, I do it multiple times. For some reason, they completely forget you exist and you can just keep doing it. I don't know if that's a bug and we'll see it in live or not. Take advantage of it. Now, in terms of all of the environmental traps you can use to give yourself a little bit of a DPS window and also obviously CC the monster, the first one's in Area 7, a falling boulder. We can easily lure him over here, since he starts in Area 7 or nearer to Area 10, of which, by the way, there are 2 vine traps you can make use of right next to him for some easy DPS there. Then you can bring him over here for a lure pod, maybe a turf war with doshaguma, get those sneak attacks in. Then you come further into the cave, where on the left there's a giant falling boulder. Then just a bit further down, you have another one with flash flies there, and another one right behind that. It's kind of ridiculous how many there actually are. Then when he comes up to Area 5 and 4, where we're up in the higher up nest, you have a sharp crystal here on the right. Further in on the left, we have another one. Then in this back corner, we have a third one. These can all be dropped on him for big damage and a knockdown. But don't forget about this kind of peculiar trap right here. It's a sort of loose shelf. If you're standing on it, he will break it and you'll fall down with him, which you don't want. But it does show up on the map as unstable ground. Drag him onto this, move off it, he'll attack and knock himself down using it for a 4th knockdown when you're up in Area 5. In regards to optimal hit zones, you want to be hitting his head, his tail, or the front limbs, the forelegs. Those are generally the best hit zones. However, the chains, when they're exposed during enrage, when they're red or purple, that means you're actually able to get a proper hit zone on those as well. And as a general tip that's great to think about, mount attacks. In this case, he has 3 weak points, which is nice, his tail, his back, and his head, and I recommend you make sure to open all 3 before breaking any one of them, and I would recommend you choose the one on the back, because that's going to be the hardest to target during regular fighting, where the head and the tail should be relatively easy. It's a good idea to try to trigger at least 2 mounts in a hunt for free DPS. You can do that with the easier mounting skill set. I believe it's the balahara set, and I'd make sure to intentionally trigger mounts when the monster is enraged or most dangerous, because that minimizes the time you're actually dealing with the most risk. On that note, maybe make use of traps for DPS as well during the enraged times where is the most dangerous. Don't forget, you can go back to a tent and restock to always have these traps on hand. Right, let's talk about the mechanics. There's 2 sides to this guy, pre-enrage and post-enrage. Pre-enrage, we got quite a few mechanics, but a lot of them come forward into post-enrage mode where they just have dangerous enhancements. One big thing to know about him then is that lots of his attacks have what I call dead angles, which is a term that I've heard ever since Dark Souls 1, where you do an attack that swings so widely that it can even hit behind you or on your side when you're actually trying to hit in front of you. With his chains and the range of them, that really happens here, and it can be very frustrating, certainly in multiplayer or if he attacks the palico and just slaps you on the side when you weren't expecting it. So be very wary of those hit zones. In terms of combos he can do, there's a simple head bite that he mostly does when he's not enraged. He can do it back to back twice. The damage is very minimal though, so I often just ignore it. Much more dangerous stuff, I say the leap slam thrust, where he leaps up into the air and then thrusts with one arm. That can be pretty scary. There's the frontal chain swipe, which is one of the scarier dead angle attacks, where he's kind of turning or almost spinning with it. I tried to get behind him or just away from him in those moments, but it is an easy perfect evade or perfect guard since it's slow and obvious. There's the double chain slam in front of him, which is just quick and medium range. And he seems to have just 2 tail attacks, one where he sort of aims it at you and thrusts, and another where he kind of spins and turns with it. Now, one of the most important things to be aware of is when he does the backflip slam and then does the chains to follow up. This is a basic combo he does both in rage and not in rage, and it gets scary when he's enraged. The simple rule for this is to roll in line with the head. So if you see him do the backflip, you know the slam's coming with the chain, but which is he going to slam? Then you move left or right and ideally stay in line with the head. It's not a big deal when he's not enraged, but when he is enraged, he does get a second whip follow-up, which means you're gonna get hit if you go outside the body. But now let's talk about post-enrage. During enrage, the glow of red and the purple appears. If you see a glow of red, a big attack is about to come as a clear warning, and that red lightning effect is basically dragon damage. Now be aware during this, most of his basic attacks have more effect, combos, and damage, which should be expected. Notably, the hit zones will activate on the chains so you can start to deal good damage to them, and I've noticed that with enough damage, you can kind of stagger him or bring him out of the enrage it with sim. Maybe they're like super sensitive. So most notably is going to be that flip and then chain slam like I said. Now there's a second chain slam to follow up after the first. It is on a delay as well, so you need to roll sideways and stay in front of the head. Very important. But this is actually a really good punish window. If you stay in front of the head, the chains will land next to you and be a good hit zone. Or you might roll and move towards the head to hit that instead. Just be wary that he can do another chain slam with the other arm in combo, so you might want to roll the opposite way to stay in front of the head, but that's the rule. There is a new move that thrusts with the chains, and that leaves red marks on the ground. These will generally just explode in dragon damage, so obviously try to avoid that. Now all monsters have a special focus mode punish that's not a wound but when they're kind of vulnerable. In this case, it's after all the big dragon explosion attacks, of which there are multiple types. The most notable super move as it were is when he's standing still and calls out almost sadly. The camera draws back and the chains come together to enhance into an almost beam. They converge into an explosion which then spreads out and echoes multiple times into a bigger and bigger explosion of dragon damage. To avoid this, you can easily just run sideways, it's very straightforward, but you can run straight into it because the hit zone of the explosion is in front of him and a bit ahead, meaning you can stand at his face or just under his head to completely avoid it while also being in the optimal DPS location. That's what I try to do if I see I can make it, but obviously very risky. The other versions of it might be, say, a mini version of that super move, where he's doing the same kind of standstill, pointing the chains forward, but with just two, it comes out a lot quicker, doesn't hit as hard, but because it's quicker, it's obviously dangerous. And lastly, there's a kind of leaping super, where he goes up into the air and does the thrust slam from the air with one arm. He seems to do this on the ground as well, rearing up and thrusting forward with one side, where he's leaning on one shoulder heavily. My advice on that is to go the opposite direction or around it, to completely avoid it. And it also is a great punish window because he comes forward to you and you sort of land right under him, near enough to the head. But yeah, I think that's going to have to cover it for all the main details and things to know for this fight. I hope all of that could be useful information that will prove helpful. I think this is a fantastic flagship, definitely up there. It reminds me of how I felt about No Gigante. But obviously it's a bit of a challenge in the context of this beta. So if you guys have any more interesting details about him or maybe useful tips, then let us know in the comments. But for now, I've been Hollow, you've been you, and thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.